pretty pleased.
Okay, we Rotary February is Rotary Peace and Reconciliation Month, and we happen to have a person with us who's been involved with that for the last 30 years of his life. For the last 30 years, him and his wife Deb have lived in Islamic countries, building bridges between Christians and Muslims to change the culture. And I've known David for 49 years, I believe. And with the benefit of technology, I'll turn it over to him right now.
Well, it's an honor and privilege to chat with you today and share a little bit about our lives in conflict resolution. And my background is I was born in Mankato, Minnesota. I went to Benilde High School, and then for my undergraduate, Minnesota State University, and for my master's and doctorate, I actually went to Bethel University Seminary. So I'm a Minnesota boy, and my wife, Debbie, was in college at North Dakota State with David. So I've known David too long now. We have done conflict resolution in Indonesia for 15 years, and my daughters grew up. We actually moved and lived in a all Muslim area, and they grew up learning the language and befriending Muslims. And then we went to the Middle East, spent 13, 14 years there, and we base now in Minnetonka, and actually in Hopkins, and I travel back and forth to Indonesia. I'll be there in about 3 weeks, in fact, and back to the Middle East, Jordan and Lebanon. And so I've been working with an organization called Common Ground. And the whole concept is to build bridges of trust to transform our families and our communities. There's strength in partnering. And for instance, in Minneapolis now, there's 200,000 Muslims in Minnesota and 120 mosques. And I am deeply involved with a number of the imams and some of the sheikh and the leaders who are political leaders or religious leaders or business leaders who are Muslim leaders in Minnesota in transforming our communities. And when you look at it, the Christians are 25% of the world, and Muslims are 25% of the world. And over the centuries, we've just been fighting with each other. And in reality, if we join hands and partner together, we can do something to transform the world. And we've been involved in that. An example, in Indonesia, where we were there for 15 years, we were heavily involved with sustainable villages. When you look at the Muslim population worldwide, there's only about 1 in 10,000 that are actual radicals and terrorists. The rest of them, and I mean, I speak their languages. They've been my neighbors for over 30 years. My daughters grew up among them. They are actually quite hospitable, very hospitable, and wonderful people that want to educate their children and feed their children, put a roof over their heads, and just normal folks like you and I. And their biggest fear we found in Indonesia as we went in, of course, we went into these villages and said, well, what do you need? And their biggest fear is radicalization, that their children be radicalized. And they were. In a number of these villages, the radicals would come in from different countries and go to these villages and promise education and take care of their kids, and they'd take the children and they'd radicalize them and different organizations that you know of. And they'd take they would get into sex trafficking and all this kind of stuff. Well, we wanted to help stop that. And we're involved in over 200 villages now across Indonesia, helping them become sustainable, both in moving from poverty to a livable income and education. For instance, in many dozens of these, probably 3% would graduate from high school. And now in all these villages, at least 85% are graduating from high school. So that's a big difference. And as far as empowering women, that's one of the main things that we do. We have probably among the women in these dozens and dozens of villages, it could be up to 200. I'm not exactly sure, but you have 70 to 75% are graduating from high school, and a good percentage going on to college. And so then when the radicals come in to these villages, the villages say, "Oh, no, we're fine. We're applying the principles of Christ that we've learned, and we are seeing what they call it in Indonesian. Okay, I have to translate it. It's redemption and lift. That there's something that's come into our culture in our villages that's helping us become sustainable. We don't need you anymore, so go away." And we did that in Indonesia, and then. And I still go back and forth there. I work very closely with a number of what they call the shiuk, which is they'd be the bishops of the areas and imams, and our movement is known all the way up to the government, even to the president, who endorses what we do and is very much behind it. And then we moved to the Middle East, and we're involved with the Syrian refugees for about 13 years. We were training many young people, nurses, doctors, dentists, and educators. How to help them to reach into the cultures, learn the Arabic language, and begin to move in and set up clinics, different clinics, medical clinics. So we have a presence in Jordan, and especially in Lebanon now. And Timberwood Church is involved there and supports some of the work there. We have midwifery and some educational, and a team of about 24, I think now we have in Lebanon that are reaching out and helping over 2,000 refugees. So the thing that I've noticed is, and we go in, and one of the things you'll find out about Muslims, if you get to know them, they're just wonderful people. We love them, and they're very spiritual. So when we go in, for instance, in Minneapolis, we'll gather a bunch of the leaders, and we'll just say, you guys are, and this is how I would present it. And I've done this numerous times and recently in a mosque in Plymouth. You guys are 25% of the world's population. We're the other 25%. All we've been doing for all these years is fighting. How about if we join each other and under the spirit of Jesus? Because in your book, Jesus is mentioned 93 times, and in our book, of course, he's mentioned all the time. So let's meet together. He's our common ground. Jesus is actually our common ground. In the past, we've all just fight about who he is. No. Let's study our books together and find the principles of who he is, and then together study his principles from the New Testament and apply these in our lives. And that's what we did in Indonesia and Jordan, and we're beginning to do it in Minneapolis. And we do. I've been invited into the inner city Muslim Council for fundraising for the inner city Muslim children. They asked me to speak. I speak Arabic, and they've asked me to. Okay, we just go. What are your needs? And the need is food and education. And one group, the Somali group, came to us and said, we have this one villages that are just they're starving. They just need food. So we put together in our common ground 9,000 Christians from all over Minnesota and from Wisconsin, and 9,000 Muslims that would come in and from all over, and did with Feed My Starving Children. So there are 18,000 people involved from all over that would come in, and in a couple of weeks we sent 18 million meals to Somalia. Well, that would really won the hearts of the Muslims towards us as we all worked together. From all over the different states coming in for a half a day or a day, just packing 24/7. And the former prime minister's wife, Mariam, who's my good friend, came to us and said, well, can Common Ground help us? We have, during Ramadan, we have so many dozens and dozens of old people that can't get out and get fed. So we got together with restaurants, we put together food, we raised money from a number of churches, and we made sure that every family from the Somalia that couldn't get out got an evening meal and a breakfast meal, and that's been continued on by Feed My Starving Children every year now. So that's the kind of thing we're doing. And yeah, are there any questions or thoughts?
Well, Dr. Dave, that was lovely.
Well, and I think one of the things that we've asked the Somali leaders, and I was invited at the Hilton. They had 250 Muslim leaders from around Minnesota, and they beamed into Somalia and welcomed in the new prime minister, and they asked me to speak. So I spoke and invited him to come over, and as we talked in those groups and that night, their biggest fear is radicalization. Now in Minnesota, are there some radicals? Yeah, there are a few, but not many. They just have a loud voice. But the vast majority are just, they don't want that. They fear that. And our media doesn't present the beauty of the Islamic people.
So I don't claim to know much about Islamic beliefs, but do we have in common with them an understanding that we should do unto others as we want them to do unto us?
That's Keith. That's an excellent thought. And the key verse that we use in the New Testament, whether we're in Indonesia or in the Middle East or in Minneapolis, is this. When Jesus says, "Know this, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And they love that. They love that concept. And if you really understand their culture, their traditions, that whole concept of love your neighbor as yourself is deeply embedded in that. And you see that in these villages and how the family values and how they take care of each other.
So are they quite accepting of the New Testament? And probably the sidebar to that is, have we reprinted the New Testament in Arabic and in their language?
Yeah. Yes. It has been into Indonesian, and in fact, there's a whole new printing done by the Muslims in Indonesia. Many of my friends who have printed the New Testament, translated, working with Wycliffe and SIL, and translating the New Testament so that it makes sense to the Muslim people, and that's been printed and sent out. I think once they start reading it, many of them are very excited about it and very interested in it, and they see the commonalities and bridges between their book and our book.
You know, many programs in Minnesota that, in a sense, do the reverse, that help us as Christians understand the commonality between their book and ours. It sounds like, it shouldn't be a one-way street.
I didn't catch that, Robert. It was a little unclear. Sorry.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were referencing how they are, comparing the Quran with the New Testament. I'm curious if there are programs in Minnesota that do the opposite, that help Christians understand the Quran.
I think we're working together in common ground to do that. And so we have before COVID, and then we did it on Zoom, a Perkins prayer breakfast once a month with some of the imams, and we bring in some of the pastors, and we would have we would discuss, they would discuss, what does your book say about Jesus? What does our book say about Jesus? And what are the commonalities? And what does your book say about loving your neighbor? And what does our book say about that? And we talk together. And we actually have times where we close in prayer together, and have some of the an imam pray, or myself or somebody else. So I think there is now an opportunity among Muslims. They really do want to have friendships with Christians. And I think they've been alienated by our media, and many Christians look at Muslims as so evil, and in reality, they're just like us, human beings. And I think, so Robert, to answer your question, yes, they really do want to reach out to us, and we're not going to agree on every point. That's not the objective. The objective is to transform ourselves, our families, and our communities. What can we learn from each other? How can we help each other?
Thank you. If there's nobody else,
I do. So a lot of it sounds like a PR job with the, you know, with the newspapers, and you're probably not flashy enough, so you have to get your flashy things out there. I mean, because that, you're right, the newspapers pick up on the bad stuff. So is there a way that you can get more of the newspapers and the radios and TVs to be listening to what you're doing? I mean, are you working on that, or
That's really good.
it's hard to do it all?
In Indonesia, we really did 4 radio stations run by Muslims that we helped establish that present these principles. Because in Indonesia, when we first got there, there were Muslim Christian wars going on. Now that has dissipated some and quite a bit, and I think part of that is the movement that we were part of starting. But yeah, that's an important thing, Mary Kay, and I don't have the answers. That the media has this propensity to enjoy presenting evil and darkness, and it's a problem.
Are you familiar with the Sufi poet Rumi?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are you familiar with Rumi?
You mean the great poet?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
And one of the favorite poems that he shared, or just a brief line, was, "I'm a hole in the flute that the Christ breath flows through. Would you like to hear a tune?"
Yes, that's
We
beautiful,
know that.
Robert.
And,
Yeah,
and he,
and Rumi was a Sufi,
right,
and spoke beautiful things about Jesus Christ as the Word of God and Spirit of God. And
right.
that's a very, Robert, that's very good, because that's where we use him as, and many of the other Muslim believers, Muslims that find Christ as Spirit of God and find him as divine. We use that as our common ground.
Thank you.
Are you finding any opposition from our mainline churches, not necessarily in support of this?
Yes. I think Timberwood and this was a very big supporter. John Just is brilliant in conflict resolution, understands this between political groups and between religions. He's very good, Pastor John Just. And then we have a number of churches that are really positive and helping us, but we do have some who expect us to go and, well, why aren't you converting them to become, a Baptist or evangelical Christians or something? And so there are churches, Steve, that's a good question, that are against this unless we are converting. We don't convert. We don't ask them to leave their religion. We just share Christ with them, and Christ can live in any religion, and they share their beliefs with us. And we found many of them in Indonesia have embraced Jesus Christ as their Messiah, as their Savior, and as their Lord. But they're Muslim, so we don't ask them to convert, and that it gives some churches consternation.
That's interesting to hear the reference that Christ can live in any faith or any religion. It reminds me a little bit of Mother Teresa, how she would go into the streets and she would see Christ in each person that she met, but most all of them that she met were not Christian.
Yeah, that's very good, Robert.
Well, I greatly appreciate your focus on the common ground. I mean, the name of the organization fits so well, and it really speaks to so much of the work that Rotary does. And when you talk about radicalization, I think the understanding the economies of the world and the impact that poverty has and starvation. Kids don't get radicalized if they're not hungry, if they don't feel hope. If they have hope, if they have food, if they have a future, they're not going to get radicalized. And so I think there's a lot of work that we need to put our attention to in that area.
Good, Robert. And we find that it's food, education, and faith. So we encourage them, if you're Muslims, be the best Muslim you can be. And we're Christians, we're be the best Christians we can be. And here's what we've learned about God. What have you learned about God? How can we walk together and go deeper in our faith and feed our people, educate and transform our communities and move away from radicalization? And as I said, we've got so many villages now that the radicals don't even try to get in there anymore. And this has been noticed by, there was a meeting in Central Java, 250 of the Muslim leaders came, and the president was coming, of Indonesia was coming to find out what are we doing in these sustainable villages? And how is this helping to keep away from sex trafficking and radicalization? And but he was on his way, and he got diverted to a tsunami incident, so he couldn't come. But he did send us a video and said, "Thank you for all you're doing. I hope to come next year." This kind of.
One of the other conflicts we seem to see in the world is the Muslim and Jewish religion. Is it any involvement in trying to bring that in?
Debbie and I, part of my doctorate, because we lived in Jordan, we were 48 miles from the conflict zones in Israel, Palestine. So we were back and forth there quite often, and did a lot of work among Palestinian refugees. So we were part of that, and that's a whole nother topic, the Israel-Palestine conflict. So there, it's interesting that in Israel there are so many Jewish people that are pro-Palestinian, so many, but governments cause horrible atrocities. It's not often the people, it's the governments that cause the corruption and wars and the evil.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCollum.
Thank you, guys.
It's the difference, and Quinn touched on it, and her Happy Find talked about how you've got to do something. You know, can't sit back and wait for things to fall in your lap. Dr. McCollum and his associates are going and meeting with the Muslims and finding that common ground rather than folding their arms and sitting back and saying, we're right, you're wrong. That just breeds more and more distrust on both sides. So God bless you and all that work with you. Thank you.
One thing about Rotary in Indonesia, there are 3 strong clubs, 2 in Jakarta, in the capital city, and 1 in Surabaya. I wrote one of my Chinese friends who lives there, who's a business, and so Rotary is a group that takes action. It's doing exactly what you said, President Harlan. And so I really appreciate what you people are doing. And yeah, thank you. Keep going.
Very good. Thanks for bearing with me as we go over the limit, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Keith, you want to ding that bell?
Thank you.